In a small American town, police found the body of an elderly man with a smashed head. Nearby were traces of blood, a murder weapon, and an empty house. His 16-year-old grandson had disappeared. After the death of his parents, the teenager lived with his grandfather. At first, the usual household rules: school, lessons, helping around the house. But after a few months, his grandfather completely took control of his life. He checked the phone, pockets, notebooks. He made them come home right after school. He forbade them from meeting with friends. If the teenager was late, he met him at the school gate and dragged him home by the hand. Every morning, the grandfather examined things. Any little thing aroused suspicion. Once a week, he searched the room, turned over the closet, checked under the mattress, looked for foreign influence. The conversations became increasingly harsh. Grandfather said that the family should be a single whole, that everyone around was an enemy, that the school, the neighbors, even the church wanted to destroy their home. He forbade closing the door to the room. He made them sit at the same table in the evenings and listen to long monologues about how family blood is more important than anything else. The teenager had to repeat these phrases out loud, otherwise he would start screaming. One day, the grandfather brought the diary and threw it on the floor. A bad grade, a disgrace to the house. The boy was silent. The grandfather pounded his fist on the wall, threatened to take him out of school and teach him himself, so that he doesn't get spoiled among strangers. He forbade sports clubs, groups, and visits to friends. No strangers, no conversations without my knowledge, he said. If the teenager was seen with someone in the yard, the grandfather dragged him home and closed the door. With each passing month, he spoke more and more often about the mission, that they had a special task, to be together, to hold on to each other. Gradually, he added phrases about the union, that no one should interfere. The teenager sat for hours listening. He didn't try to argue. Every word ended with threats to take away his documents, to forbid him from school, so that he doesn't learn someone else's lies. In winter, my grandfather began checking notebooks with homework. If he saw someone else's signature or note, he tore the pages and shouted that other people's thoughts are poison. He had thrown the boy out into the street in the middle of the night several times for disobedience. He stood in the yard in his jacket while his grandfather smoked on the porch and gave him long lectures on discipline. The neighbors heard the screams, but did not interfere. They thought that the grandfather was simply strict. In fact, he came up with new rules every week. Get up at 6, say only yes or no, eat silently, do not watch TV without permission. He said that school teaches heresy, that teachers are enemies of the family. He made me retell lessons at home, asking, "What are they drilling into you?" If I didn't like the answers, he would slam his fist on the table. By spring, the teenager had stopped talking to his classmates. He answered questions about how he was doing in monosyllables. He didn't go outside. In the evenings, he sat at the same table with his grandfather, who repeated the same thing for hours. We have a mission. We must be together. We have no others. In the last month before the murder, the grandfather locked the phone in the closet. He took away the key to the barn. He forbade closing the door even to the toilet, so there would be no secrets. The teenager listened, kept silent, and did everything. But according to notes in his school notebook, which investigators later found, he was counting the days until the moment when it would all end. Spring 1993. The house looked normal from the outside. An old fence, a garage with rusty gates, rare neighbors in the evenings, but inside the atmosphere was becoming heavier. Grandfather took complete control. He set the alarm himself at 6 in the morning. He checked how his grandson made his bed, how he brushed his teeth, how many minutes he spent eating breakfast. Any little thing caused criticism. You're sitting wrong. You're chewing too slowly. Where are you looking? He made them account for everything. Who they talked to during breaks, who sat next to them in class, what the teachers asked them. If the answer was not satisfactory, the grandfather would shout that strangers are destroying the family. The phone was locked. The money was with the grandfather. Pockets, backpack, notebooks were checked every evening. Any piece of paper was suspicious. Who gave it to me? What did you write? Why didn't you tell me? Such questions were heard daily. My grandfather threw away notebooks several times if he saw someone else's handwriting. He believed that there might be thoughts against the family there. The teenager stopped communicating with his classmates. Even the teachers noticed that he avoided everyone. After school, he went straight home. He had no friends. In the evening, he sat at the same table with his grandfather and listened to his long speeches. Grandfather repeated the same thing. We have a mission. We must be one. No one has the right to interfere. Sometimes he said that everyone around was an enemy, that they want to destroy the family. He forbade laughing, forbade closing the door, forbade reading books he didn't approve of. He left only school textbooks. If he saw a magazine or a newspaper, he tore it into pieces. Sometimes he made him repeat his phrases out loud. We are together. We will not betray each other. We do not need anyone. If the teenager spoke quietly, the grandfather raised his voice and demanded louder. Several times during the night, he woke him up and made him sit at the table. He read him long lectures about the duty of the family. If his grandson fell asleep, he threw a book or a mug at the wall. Neighbors recalled that they often heard screams in March. Sometimes late at night, the grandfather would send the teenager out into the yard to think about his behavior. He would stand in a jacket in the rain while the grandfather smoked and said that family is discipline. Once he forbade him to eat for a whole day because the boy looked the wrong way at his neighbor through the window. The next day, he made him write an essay about why you can't betray your family. Towards the end of March, he banned school for 3 days. He said that they teach enemy ideas there. The teenager sat at home, reading the family Bible aloud while his grandfather listened. In early April, my grandfather said several times that they must be one body and soul, that they have their own mission, their own truth. These conversations became longer and more aggressive. The teenager began writing dates on the last page of the notebook. No words, just numbers. Investigators later found these notes. The last 2 weeks before the murder were marked with crosses. 5 days before the tragedy, his grandfather kicked him out into the yard in the middle of the night for staying silent for too long at dinner. The teenager stood in the cold for 2 hours. In 3 days, broke his school notebook in half when he saw a note from a classmate, shouted that they are all enemies. No one should interfere in the family. 1 day before, he forbade dinner and said that everything foreign must be eradicated. The evening before the murder, he made me sit at the table for 2 hours and repeat, we must be together. We will not betray each other. The teenager repeated himself, but as the investigation established, at that moment, he was already preparing the club, which he kept in the barn. On the morning of the tragedy, the grandfather checked his pockets, backpack, and diary again. He yelled at the teenager for not looking him in the eyes the right way. Then he made him sweep the yard, reread the rules, and sit silently at the table. By evening, the grandfather went to bed. The teenager took the stick. The evening was cold, but the house was completely silent. Grandfather, as usual, checked all the locks, put the keys in his pocket, made sure his grandson was in the room, turned off the light, and went to bed. The grandson sat motionless on a chair, stared at one point, then stood up, went to the barn, took a heavy hockey stick, came back, and stood in the shade for a long time. The clock showed almost midnight. He did not turn on the light so that his grandfather would not wake up. His steps were quiet, even as if he had thought everything through in advance. The grandfather was sleeping soundly. His snoring could be heard even behind the door. The grandson slowly opened the bedroom door, entered and stood next to the bed. For a few seconds, he just stood there. Then he hit him once. The grandfather jerked, but did not even have time to get up. The second blow landed on the head. The third broke his skull. The blows were fast, sharp. The whole bed was covered in blood. The grandfather's body went quiet. The grandson hit until he realized that the old man was not moving. Investigators later determined that the blows were chaotic, but all hit the head. The skull was fractured in several places. The murder weapon remained on the floor. The grandson dropped the club, wiped his hands on the sheet, and went to the bathroom. There he washed his hands, face, looked in the mirror for a long time. Then he returned to the room, took a backpack, put a couple of things in it, documents, some food and money that his grandfather kept in the nightstand. Everything happened silently, methodically, without haste. He left the house through the back door, took the keys to the shed and a bicycle. The neighbors did not see or hear anything suspicious. The lights in the house were no longer turned on. The grandfather's body was lying on the bed. Blood was dripping onto the floor. The sheet was completely soaked. The police would later record the time of death as around midnight. The grandson rode towards the old highway. CCTV cameras later captured his silhouette near an abandoned gas station. He left his bike there and continued on foot. No one knows where he went that night. The body was discovered only the next day after lunch. A neighbor came to ask her grandfather to help with the car. The door was unlocked. She went in and called, but no one answered. In the bedroom, she saw a bloody bed, a body, and a fallen hockey stick. She immediately called the police. The investigation team arrived 20 minutes later. They recorded traces of blood in the bedroom, on the floor, On the walls, the fingerprints were only those of the owner and the teenager. There were no signs of forced entry. The windows were closed, and the belongings were almost untouched. The police quickly established that the grandson had disappeared. He was not at school or at his neighbors. No one had seen him since the night before. They launched a search throughout the entire district. They checked train stations, abandoned houses, bus stations. A notebook with marked days was found in the house. The last pages were covered with crosses. Investigators decided that the teenager had planned the moment of escape in advance, but he left no notes or explanations. Experts recorded the murder was committed in a state of severe mental stress. The blows were chaotic, but targeted at the head. Death occurred quickly. Neighbors told the police about the grandfather's strange behavior, but no one expected such an ending. One man remembered that 2 days before the tragedy, he saw the grandfather throw the teenager out into the rain at night. Another said that he heard screams almost every evening, but no one dared to intervene. 3 days after the murder, the teenager's bicycle was found on an old highway, but he was gone. The dogs followed the scent to a forest belt and lost it. It was assumed that the teenager could have gotten into a passing car or hidden somewhere in abandoned buildings. Official reports noted, on the 4th day after the murder, the area was combed by police, volunteers, even a helicopter was brought in. No traces. The press wrote about a brutal murder and the mysterious disappearance of a teenager. The case received wide resonance. Newspapers published headlines about domestic hell, about the grandfather's pressure, about the strange life of the family after the death of the parents. Psychologists spoke about possible psychological trauma, about long-term pressure and isolation. But in the first weeks after the tragedy, the main goal remained to find the teenager. His photo was published in all the news. Hospitals, shelters, train stations were checked. Wanted notices were sent out to neighboring states. No eyewitnesses reported his whereabouts. The gas station cameras were the last confirmation that he was alive and had left on his own. The house was sealed off after the murder. Neighbors avoided it. Everything in the garage remained the same as on the day of the tragedy. Tools, a disassembled car, a teenager's notebooks on the table. Investigators collected all possible evidence, but the main witness, the teenager himself, was missing. His disappearance became the second mystery of the case after the grandfather's death. Immediately after the old man's body was discovered, the police cordoned off the house. The neighbors stood behind the tape and silently watched as they carried out the bloody bed, photographed the footprints, collected samples from the floor and walls, recorded the fingerprints on the hockey stick and door handles. The local police officer said that the boy needed to be found immediately. Perhaps he was wounded or in shock. Investigators from the district arrived at the scene, questioned neighbors, teachers, employees of the store where the grandfather bought groceries. Everyone said the same thing. The old man was strict, withdrawn, often shouted at his grandson, but no one expected a murder. Investigators collected dates when they heard screams, recorded episodes when the teenager was seen standing in the rain at night in the yard, recorded testimony about the prohibitions imposed by the grandfather, about his strange conversations about family and mission, about the boy's complete isolation from the outside world. On the 3rd day after the murder, search teams with dogs were brought into the case. They combed the forest belt near the old highway, where they found an abandoned bicycle. The trail went through a field and ended at the highway. They assumed that the teenager got into a stranger's car or hid in an abandoned house, of which there are many along the highway. They examined sheds, empty barns, old warehouses. Several times they found traces of an overnight stay, fire pits, food wrappers, but DNA tests later yielded no results. Newspapers wrote about the domestic hell, about the grandfather's tyranny, about the fact that the boy could not withstand the pressure. Journalists interviewed psychologists who spoke about psychosis, about the victim syndrome, about the possibility of affect, but investigators did not give official comments, except for dry information about the progress of the search. A week later, rumors surfaced that the teen had been seen at a bus station in a nearby town, but surveillance cameras confirmed nothing. Several people claimed he had been walking along the highway toward Ohio, but dogs did not pick up the scent beyond the county line. The police checked all distant relatives. No one had seen the boy. No one had received calls or letters. Banks had not recorded any attempts to withdraw money. His schoolmates said he had never talked about running away, made any plans, or asked for help. In the house, in addition to notebooks with marked days, they found several sheets of paper with identical phrases written by the teenager by hand. "We must be together. No one has the right to interfere. Family above all." Experts decided that his grandfather forced him to write these words repeatedly. As punishment or as a form of pressure, the murder weapon was sent for examination. The blows were delivered with great force, chaotically, but all to the head. Forensic experts said that death occurred immediately after the third blow, but the teenager continued to hit several more times. Blood spatter on the walls and floor indicated that the blows were delivered standing, from top to bottom, with a swing. 2 weeks later, they began to consider the version that the boy could have died after escaping. They checked rivers, abandoned mines, old wells. They found nothing. A theory emerged that he could have been picked up by truck drivers or hitchhikers. The police sent out wanted posters to all neighboring states. Psychiatrists who studied the diary spoke of extreme isolation and pressure. They claimed that the teenager was under extreme stress, that the murder could have been impulsive, but the escape seemed planned. He took food, money, documents. This means he thought about the escape in advance. Every day the versions grew. Some believed that he had gone far away and started a new life under a false name. Others said that he could have committed suicide somewhere in the woods or abandoned mines. There were even versions about sects. Supposedly, the teenager could have been taken by religious fanatics, but no evidence was found. Grandfather's house remained sealed. Neighbors avoided it. The garage with rusty gates, boarded up windows, silence inside. All this looked like a grim reminder of what had happened. A month later, the search was scaled back. The case was officially classified as a murder with an unknown location of the suspect. New reports from citizens were periodically checked, but none of the information was confirmed. Investigators kept all the evidence: the hockey stick, notebooks, neighbors' notes, teachers' testimony, grandfather's medical records, certificates from school. Psychologists created a profile of the teenager, withdrawn, under constant pressure, with a limited social circle, with long-term control and punishment. Everything indicated that the murder was the end of many years of pressure, but there were no answers to the main question. Where is he? Is he alive? Why did he disappear without a trace? By autumn, the case had not moved forward. The reports only mentioned new verified addresses and false calls. A jacket similar to his was found on one farm, but the examination did not confirm its identity. Over time, the press's interest faded. Newspapers moved on to other stories. The county archives contained photographs of a bedroom with bloodstains, notebooks with identical phrases, a map with search locations marked. The case officially remained open, but no active search activities were carried out. By the winter of 1993, the search for the teenager had essentially ceased. There were no longer enough police or volunteers, no new leads were found, and the versions were gradually exhausted. Official reports indicated only verified facts. The murder was committed on the night of April 12th. The deceased was a grandfather, 67 years old, and died from multiple blows to the head with a blunt object. The suspect was a 16-year-old teenager who had disappeared that same night. The murder weapon, a hockey stick, was lying on the floor next to the bed. Traces of blood belonged only to the victim and the teenager. The escape trail ended at the highway 3 kilometers from the house. Beyond that, there was nothing. No witnesses, no cameras, no traces. The house contains notebooks with phrases he wrote many times. We must be together. No one has the right to interfere. Family above all. Experts confirmed that the text was written under pressure. The handwriting is uneven, with signs of fatigue and stress. Psychiatrists concluded that long-term psychological pressure, isolation, control over every action could lead to an explosion of aggression and flight. The teenager's condition was described as a nervous breakdown with a complete loss of connection with others. Neighbors testified about screaming, nighttime punishments, prohibitions, but no one reported it before. The police noted that there were signs of domestic tyranny, but there was no intervention since there were no open complaints from the teenager. 6 months after the murder, the case was officially listed as unsolved, with a note, "Suspect not found." It was reopened once a year to check for new reports, but nothing was ever confirmed. Grandfather's house was sold only 2 years later. The new owner completely rebuilt it, demolished the garage, replaced the roof, repainted the walls. The old neighbors moved away or died, and the memory of the Harris family gradually faded. The county archives contain photographs of the crime scene, copies of the testimony, a map with search areas marked. On the wall hangs a poster with the teenager's face, yellowed, with the edges peeling off. A 1995 county police report states, "Suspect's whereabouts unknown, no signs of life found." Possible theories include out-of-state escape, accidental death, or being hidden by a third party. No evidence to support any of these theories. In 2001, the case was finally moved to the archives. The statute of limitations for murder in the state had not expired, but no action was taken. No body, no new evidence, no witnesses ever came forward. Today, the case is considered one of the county's most mysterious. All documents are available only upon official request. A new cottage stands on the site of the old house, and only old newspaper clippings remind us that a dead man was found here 30 years ago, and the teenager disappeared, as if he had vanished into thin air.